Should we require the mandatory labeling of genetically modified foods? There's several implications or impacts that labeling can have on sales, consumer views on products, and the like. And we can see the impacts of it when we look at milk from cows that have been treated with RBST. Cows that have been treated with this hormone produce larger quantities of milk than cows who haven't been treated. But the use of RBST has been stigmatized, and producers of milk have prided themselves on producing milk without cows that have been treated with RBST. These producers have begun labeling their milk to promote that. This has led to a stigma in the consumer's mind of milk that doesn't have this label being inferior or dangerous to consume. Scientific studies have shown that there is no difference in between milk produced by cows treated with RBST and those who haven't. But let's look at what we know about genetically modified organisms. There are safety issues regarding gene flow. It is impossible to prevent things like pollen being dispersed in the air from genetically modified organisms to non-genetically modified organisms. So plants that are natural or native to a habitat can be influenced or gain genetic modification from pollen dispersal in a local area. There are also contractual issues regarding gene flow. Companies patent genes and seeds and the like, and because it is impossible to prevent pollen dispersal and other forms of gene flow, farmlands can be, in a word, contaminated with these patented genes. And that can lead to contractual issues, lawsuits, and so forth. The safety issues regarding consumption, however, are far different. People are worried that consuming modified genes will somehow alter their own DNA. This has been shown that it is not the case. Because if consuming genes could alter our DNA, consuming basically any food would change our genetic makeup. That being said, consumers have a right to know what they're consuming. And U.S. policy has historically shown that we retain that right as consumers. You can see this by any product that we buy in stores. Any commercially produced product contains not only a list of ingredients, but a list of the nutrition facts associated with the food that we're about to consume. U.S. policy has dictated that we have the right to know everything that we can know about what we're eating. So it makes sense to follow that trend and promote the labeling of genetically modified organisms. That being said, we need to make sure that with that right to know, consumers are making educated decisions. Things like genetic modification tend to appeal more to emotions and to fear rather than logic and reason. Looking back at RBST treated milk, there's more of an appeal to the shock value of artificial growth hormones, the use of wording which, to a degree, scares people to keep people from buying milk produced by cows treated with RBST, rather than appealing to logic and reason, which has become more of the case with that little asterisk at the end of the statement on the label that says milk was produced by cows who have not been treated with RBST. That little asterisk leads you to the back of a carton, fine print that says there's no difference between milk produced by cows treated with it and milk by cows who haven't been treated with RBST. But people don't always go to that asterisk and learn about it. We need to ensure that if we're labeling these foods, that if we're appealing to consumer demand, we're making sure that people are educated about the topic, that people know the risks, the benefits, that people know the risks are very minimal before we appeal to emotion. For an example, if there are mandatory labels, I'm sure that there are some groups out there opposed to genetically modified organisms who would like a label, as you can see here on the left, stating something along the lines of this corn was grown on a genetically modified plant. This corn was grown on a plant genetically modified to produce herbicides and insecticides in its tissue. Consuming this corn, you will be consuming altered levels of herbicides and insecticides. And that in itself, although it may be true, is concerning to the average person. Somebody who is either scientifically illiterate or ignorant, somebody who doesn't understand the impacts of these produced herbicides and insecticides, may be scared away from buying. And that can drive down the price of a perfectly safe corn, for instance, and drive up the price of other corns. If you look at the label on the right, this label provides the consumer with accurate information. You can have asterisks at the ends of these statements that link back to scientific articles, such as you will see on the next slide. This label, for instance, says this corn was genetically altered, but it also states scientific evidence shows that the consumption of altered DNA cannot alter your own DNA or produce other adverse health effects. The levels of herbicides and insecticides that this plant was altered to produce will in no way impact your health. These are the studies associated with those claims. Other proposed labeling ideas, such as Gregory Schaft's inclusion of GMO in the ingredient list, is informative and overt, yet does not appeal to the emotion. Basically, this idea is that in the ingredient list, not in other large labels on the package of whatever food that you're purchasing, but rather in the ingredient list, if you have something like genetically modified soybeans, it says that those soybeans are genetically modified. And again, in this ingredient list, you can have asterisks linked to claims, linked to articles, indicating that these foods are still safe to eat. But what does this all mean for the consumer. If we look back at milk produced by cows who have been treated by RBST, the majority of consumers and distributors have decided that they don't want to sell or consume milk that has been produced with the use of RBST. So it has basically pushed a lot of the market for this milk out. But there's no scientific basis for the shift in consumerism. There's no danger to the consumer. There's no adverse health effects associated with the consumption of milk produced by cows who have been treated with RBST. The problem is, U.S. consumer policy is okay with that. U.S. consumer policy is very hands-off free market and allows the consumer to dictate what it wants. But consumer trends lean towards the side of organic foods, foods that are not genetically modified, and consumption levels do not provide for the ability to have a completely organic food base in the U.S. market. We need genetically modified foods to increase production levels to keep up with consumer demand. These are my citations. I understand that we are supposed to use outside sources that aren't required readings for the class, but these are the most applicable sources that I could find. I searched high and low, and unfortunately could not come up with sources outside of our required readings that more clearly explained the points that I was trying to make.